Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. We are in a series on how to start a movement, and I had the opportunity of meeting Rebecca Costa, and she started to share what she was doing, the research that she's done in terms of understanding human nature, biology, and how our minds work, and how I've read both of her books, which I recommend both of these books, The Watchman's Rattle, and as well On the Verge, which is her latest book, talking about human nature, evolution, and we're going to be talking about predictive analysis. And the reason why I brought Rebecca on is because in order to start a movement and grow a movement, you have to understand human nature, and you have to understand how to gather people, because it's not just about you. It's about you bringing a whole bunch of people along with you and making a huge impact. And why do people start movements? Because they want to make a greater impact in the world. They want to solve world problems. And so this is the topic that we're going to be talking about here today, because Rebecca is an expert in how to solve world problems and understanding the psychology behind it. So I'm really excited to have her here. She is an American sociobiologist and futurist. She is a global expert on the subject of fast adaptation and recipient of the prestigious Edward O. Wilson Biodiversity Technology Award. I'm not going to read her whole bio because we'll be here all day. She's quite accomplished. And so I'm really excited to have her here. Welcome to Leaders of Transformation, Rebecca. We're excited to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And my goodness, thank you for sending me your books. And so I had the opportunity to read through these. These were fascinating, meaty reads, but like I literally, they were page turners. Like I could not put them down. I was like, ooh, I want to keep reading. So really, really fascinating when you talk about, the one is the thinking our way out of extinction. And then when we get into talking about predictive analysis and so forth. So let's talk about how do you solve complex world problems? I mean, a small question, a minor question, but when we look at some of the major things that are happening in the world, and, there's a lot of opinions about how to solve those problems. It's like some people will say, isn't this obvious? This is what we're supposed to do. And then other people are like, no, we're supposed to do that. This is what we need to do, or don't believe that there's a problem at all. So where do we start in starting to create solutions where we can move forward?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of opinions. And I'm a scientist by training, and I really don't care about opinions. Worse than that, I've been accused of being insensitive because I don't really care about feelings either. I care about facts. And it's been demonstrated, as you point out in my book, The Watchman's Rattle, that as a society loses a grip on the difference between a unproven belief and a empirically provable fact, that it loses its way. And it, in no time at all, social and public policy becomes based on opinion, because there's a mass confusion in the society and amongst its leaders between what is an empirical fact and what is an opinion or conjecture. And as you know, I go backwards in time to see if that was a precursor to unilateral collapse of the societies that were great before us, before our greatness. That includes the Khmer Empire, the Roman Empire, the Egyptian Ming. All of these empires lost a grip on what was factual. And I think we're going through that same transformation right now, where we have people who are alleged experts and people that have a tremendous amount of power in the society, and they don't seem to be able to make a distinction between what is a scientifically and empirically proven fact and what is their own opinion and belief. And that distinction is probably the most important distinction to make in any transformation. If you don't know if something is debatable, and I'll give you a specific example rather than make it theoretical. Let's just talk about climate change as a social movement. There are billions of temperature recordings of the Earth's surface temperature. We have billions and billions of readings now. And so on a strictly empirical basis, regardless of how you feel about climate change, you like it, you don't like it, you believe it, you don't believe it, it doesn't matter. The empirical data says that the Earth is warming. The oceans are warming, the land is warming. And we are beginning to see some of the symptoms of that. Venice has record floods, and we're seeing superstorms, and we're seeing all the kinds of things that scientists predicted. Now, their predictions on the timeline have been wrong, right? And so it's easy to dismiss the empirical facts and you throw out the baby with the bathwater. But the fact is that the climate is changing and it is warming. Okay, now, this is where we get into a big political discussion. How much, if any, has human activity contributed to it? That's a fair question. I'm sorry for people who want to, turn the podcast off and say she's insane. Of course we caused it. Causation in science is extremely difficult to prove, particularly with something as complex as global climate. We can barely predict whether you need an umbrella and raincoat tomorrow morning and what time that rain may hit. So don't go telling me that we know for a fact that human activity is the main cause of climate change. We do not know that, and it's a fair argument. And every year we collect more data that seems to point in that direction, but there's a lot of other factors. There are billions and billions of factors that go into determining causation where climate is concerned. More importantly, there's a second question, and that is, even if human activity contributed all, part, none, do we have the ability to reverse that climate change? And that is also a fair question, in my opinion. We may be able to do everything that Greta Thunberg advocates and the environmentalists all over the world advocate, and we may have almost no influence. And so is the climate warming is not a question. Whether humans are contributing some, none, all, is a question that's valid to investigate. And can we have an influence on it? That is also all theoretical. Those two other questions our answers are theoretical. They are not empirical answers. And so I think we have to begin to get smarter and divide those things that we can empirically prove against those things that are theoretical. And that would be an example of mine. Now I get in a lot of trouble over that because people say, well, of course, human activity. And let me show you all the reasons why. And of course we can stop it, or we can slow it, or we can reverse it. It isn't that simple. And so when it comes to complex problems, the danger that people have is they overstate what the empirical data indicates. And that overstepping will eventually bite you in the rear. Anybody who's a leader of a social movement listening to this podcast, don't do it. You'll be tempted to make extreme statements, but sooner or later, someone's going to come and confront you with the factual evidence that your cures or some of the things that you're saying are overextended and untrue and cannot be proven, at least not at this time.
And then what you end up doing is people that originally trusted in you start to question their trust in you.
You wind up Al Gore in climate change, making hard predictions which could not be empirically backed up, were theoretical, and then your credibility is damaged.
Right.
And so you don't want to
do your research.
You don't want to take one step forward and 5 back. You just stick to what can factually be proven. And I think there is nothing wrong, as a scientist I'm saying this, there is nothing wrong with saying, look, there's a lot of data that points in that direction, but we cannot say that it's causal. We can say it's correlated. We can say it seems to be related. And I think that we have to be careful about telling the truth of what we know and what we surmise. may be the truth. Now, where I come down on climate change is very simple. People say, well, you know, do you not believe in climate change? No, climate change isn't something you believe or don't believe in. It is occurring because it is fact-based. But where I come down is, if there is any threat that could wipe out the entire species, then I kind of have to err on the side of caution. You know, so I don't really understand the climate change deniers, first of all, because it's factual, but second of all, those who don't want to do anything about it.
Right.
You know, if there's a threat to the entire species, I think, you know, better safe than sorry comes to mind.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't have to believe that we could change it or stop it. I just think we owe it to ourselves to do everything we can, knowing that doing everything we can may not do anything.
Right. But at least you're doing something. It reminds me of a gentleman years ago who said, he said, you know, there's certain things that, like in making decisions about things and assumptions about things, is to say, you know, there's certain things you don't want to be wrong about, because it's you can't reverse it later. You know, it's like too late. Like, this is the wrong thing to be wrong about.
Yeah,
you know?
and that's exactly right. We can't be wrong about climate change, right? And so just better safe than sorry.
We study, we
I'm
research.
a common sense scientist, right? You know, if the consequence is this big, then, you know, it's in your interest to act. But, you know, the issue between facts and beliefs, it's tricky. I'm going to give you another example where it gets nonsensical. So there's I can't say the doctor's name and I can't say the hospital, because I'll, you know, a whole plethora of lawsuits will ensue. But the largest hospital in the area I live in has a rather amazing doctor there, and he has collected a lot of information that shows that the protocols that hospitals use to treat sepsis in the hospital don't do anything. In other words, if you don't treat the patient for sepsis, and you do treat them very expensively, right, and use the hospital's known protocols, the outcomes are exactly the same.
Wow.
So, right. So in this day where people can't afford medical care, he has provided all the evidence that shows that everything the hospital does to try to treat sepsis actually has no better outcome than letting the person's body either fight it off or die from it. It's going to be, your body's going to decide that, not the hospital and not the doctor. And so he gathered all the doctors in the hospital and said, we're spending a lot of money on something that we can see here actually does nothing. And we must stop this nonsense. And the head administrator of the hospital walked out and he said, well, I understand how you feel, but sometimes people just feel better if they feel like we're doing something.
Wow. Yes.
Knowing there is no actual empirical outcome change. So,
which is one thing, but if you actually then take it and say, we realize this isn't helping, how about we spend the money trying to find a solution that will make a difference versus...
Bingo.
Right.
Bingo. So all that money being wasted, making you feel as though something is being done, when actually it's not going to do anything, your body's either going to fight the sepsis off or not, is being wasted. And this is where there's this problem between our belief that that's going to make people feel better and the empirical fact that it does nothing, really start to butt heads. And we live in a time where it's very, very difficult for people to separate those activities. We do a lot of things like treat people for sepsis, particularly in the medical community, where you would think doctors would be very, very empirically driven. More and more, they're doing processes and treatments that have no effect on human health, zero. And so the costs go up, and, you know, and you look at mortality rates, and longevity and all of that. And you should be seeing dramatic improvements, and you don't see any of that because we're allowing the nonsense to continue. If I have a worry right now, it's that we're not an empirically driven world. If I have optimism, it's because more and more we're depending on machines to make decisions on our behalf. And that the pendulum will swing because machines do not have beliefs. Right. They only will analyze data.
Right.
And so we're going to move from belief driven to machines who are saying, I'm not going to treat, a robot will say, I'm not going to treat you for sepsis. And here's why, Rebecca, because it won't do anything.
Right, right. Now let's talk about critical mass, because what you have here is you have critical mass where a majority of the population believes a certain way, operates a certain way, right? And so there was a critical mass that was established to be able to create that new belief, right? Like anything, right? The world is flat. Oh, the world is not flat. Okay. And then gradually, like anything. So in order for people who are starting a movement, they've got to create some critical mass around a new way of thinking or a new way of operating, right? This transformation. So what are some of the basic tenets to creating that critical mass to actually affect change in a positive way?
Well, it's a complex, multi-layered process. The first thing that we must understand is there can be no social change of any importance without recruitment. Right. So when you get in someone's face and you alienate them and you call them names and you treat them as though they're stupid and their opinions are invalid and everything, you're doing exactly the reverse of what you intend to do. You must always be thinking in terms of not proving other people are wrong, but in terms of recruiting them, because there has never been massive social change in human society without developing first critical mass. Examples would be the Vietnam War. Once Dan Rather brought pictures of 18-year-olds fighting in the jungles in Vietnam, those black and white newsreels, into the living rooms of the mothers and fathers whose sons were in Vietnam, and those families got out in the street and protested. It was the end of the Vietnam War. Civil rights was the same thing. We saw black students trying to enter colleges being beaten with baseball bats, and people got out into the streets. Common citizens who had no vested direct interest got out in the street, and we saw a change in civil rights. So anytime you're looking to have any kind of massive change, the number one most important tenet is that you must recruit. The number two is you must leverage the media to do that recruitment. You must bring the reason that you are leading that social change into the living rooms of every living human being. And today you can do that through Twitter, through social media, through the major news networks. I mean, we have so many mediums that we can leverage and use. It used to be, radio, right? People had radios in their homes, and then we moved to black and white TVs, which had programming for a couple hours a day. You'd have to turn it on between 6 and 9 p.m. and then it just went off the air. And now we've got so many more mediums, and new ones will come about. We will see more with the advent of 5G. 5G will allow machines to communicate directly with other machines, and that will open up new media channels that we don't have today. They're hard to conceive of. I can't even, as a futurist, conceive of what those will be. But you must try to reach as many people as you can with your message, and make your message compelling to them, relevant to them, and recruit them, because without numbers, you got nothing. Which is why it's very sad to see in the United States in particular, see the kind of polarization that you see right now, you know, going on between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's the reason nothing gets done.
Right.
The reason nothing gets done is they don't understand that they have to recruit the people from the other team, and no one's working on that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, it's like
that gridlock will continue.
Yeah, I remember one of my other guests, he talked about we spend so much time identifying the point of difference. Polls, for example, to define the differences in how people think, but it doesn't define the commonalities. So gaining that agreement, right, is enrolling somebody and recruiting somebody is to find that point of agreement to start with, right? And to say, oh, okay, this is what we do agree on. Now, what
Yes.
can we do? How can we go from there?
Yes,
So how do you do that? Like, what's
climate
an
change is a good example. When I meet with people who are climate change deniers, you know, I go to them and say, well, look, there are billions of temperature readings, so it is warming up. But here's what I'll give you. I think what you're trying to say is that you're not convinced humans are responsible for it, and you're not convinced humans can do anything about it. And they look at me and they say, yeah, that's what I said. And I said, no, you said that there's no climate change. And they go, okay, there's climate change, but I don't think we did it. So now we're narrowing down into an area that we can have a discussion about.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I slowly kind of suggest that, well, let's say we did or we didn't. Let's say we didn't know if we did or we didn't. Do you think we should not do anything if potentially we get wiped off the planet? And then you go, well, you know, but what if all the things that we need to do don't do anything? And I go, well, have you never embarked on an endeavor that produced no results in your life? I mean, you probably did a lot of things, right? I got an education in sociobiology, and then I remember coming home and sitting with my dad, and he had a newspaper, and he opened up the newspaper and he said, yeah, I look, no jobs for sociobiologists. There's jobs for dental assistants, accountants, you know, teachers' aides. He goes, but yeah, no sociobiologists. What's your plan here? Right. And so there are many things you do in life that you may not know that the outcome is certain. You know, you place really good bets, and the bigger the upside and the bigger the downside, the more important it is to place those bets. I believe so.
Yeah.
You know,
well, and yours is a perfect example.
Starting point.
It's a perfect example because no, there weren't any jobs for sociobiologists, and yet, as you journeyed up along that path, doors opened up, opportunities opened up. And I think that sometimes that's what happens a lot of times. People say, well, I don't know that we can make a difference there. So then you don't try at all. And it's like, well, what if we made an attempt? What if we actually started down that path? Maybe we pivot, maybe we turn and we just discover something along the way that opens up a different door, but that we would never have discovered had we not started the journey in the first place.
Well, I'm the best example of that. I'm a living example of that. I had something show up on my screen. I don't know what that was. It was kind of random. When I explained I was a sociobiologist, my parents happened to live in what was later to become Silicon Valley. They said, well, based on what you've explained a sociobiologist does, you know what motivates people, you know human nature. So we're going to put you in marketing because maybe you'll be able to get people to want to buy these products. And I thought, oh, well, okay, people always want to buy new things. We're novelty-seeking organisms, right? We're designed by nature to be curious and to want to get, you know, we get over new stimulation very fast. That's one of the features of human beings. We learn something new, and then from the moment we learn it, we become bored with it. it almost instantaneously, this phenomena happens. So you keep thinking about that large flat screen TV you want, and then you get it, and every time you walk by it in the living room, you kind of feel a little thrill. But the fact is, from the moment you hung it up in the living room, the juice you get from it just starts going down, like at an incredible rate. So I thought, well, maybe I can do that. So I wound up becoming a marketing professional in technology, in emerging technologies, which was an interesting place to be in Silicon Valley at the time, because people didn't really know why they needed these things. And so I had the opportunity to work with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who were saying, hey, we're going to make these really cool computers that people could have at home. And I'm thinking, well, what would they do with them? But okay, there'll be something that they can do with them. And so we had to convince people that they needed these things. Smartphones, everything that was coming out of Silicon Valley was new, and it was disrupting the way that we were living every day, every single day. And that pathway continued, in fact, accelerated. But a sociobiologist in marketing of technology products. And now what's really wonderful for me is that it put me smack in the middle of looking at how technology is changing society and changing the way we do things, how we live, how we work, and put me in the forefront of that. But at the time, I was just looking to pay rent.
Right.
Buy groceries and move out of my parents' house. That was my big goal.
And that was their big goal.
Yeah, their goal too. So you don't really know how these things are going to stack up. But at some point, technology and being a sociobiologist intersected and gave me the career that I've had since.
What a tremendous opportunity. Just really amazing to bring those two worlds together.
Not planned, just just very serendipitous. But it's really given me a spectacular career and allowed me to work with the most bleeding edge scientists in the world. In fact, just last week I was in Columbus, Ohio, with Jansen Robotics and Sophia, the most famous AI-powered humanoid in the world. And I was working with David Jansen there. So I'm really got my hands on pretty much every emerging technology in every university lab and every global company lab. And it's wonderful. And I can see that we, unlike previous civilizations, have this opportunity. We have this opportunity to allow computers and artificial intelligence to guide our decisions on an empirical and factual basis, in spite of our opinions, in spite of our theories.
Right.
And that's what artificial intelligence is really going to do for us. And it's very important for people who are leading social movements and trying to transform organizations or societies to understand that more than your opinion and your instincts, the billions and billions of data points that artificial intelligence can observe, analyze in real time in a dynamic way is going to far overshadow any human capability, and is already doing so.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I encourage our listeners to go get a copy of The Watchman's Rattle to start off with. Because in here you talk about something very interesting, and we're going to talk about the technology, but to back up and to encourage our listeners to fill in the gaps of, you talk about in your book about cognitive threshold in terms of trying to solve problems. And the Mayans, for example, you talk about how they got to this point where they couldn't figure out how to solve these problems, and they didn't have the technology, they didn't have AI back then. And then they reverted to beliefs and started sacrificing and doing all these things, hoping that would work, and that didn't work, of course. And so I would encourage our listeners to go and read up on this, because you also talk about super memes and things that drive behavior and so forth. But I do want to spend the time that we do have left and talk about the technology and where it is and where it's going. right? Where is this technology going? AI, predictive analysis, you've talked and alluded about it, but let's talk specifically about where do you see it actually making that impact?
Well, the most important thing is that in the past, we have felt like the future was a guess. The best we could do is just make a good guess, or take a few facts that we had and project them outward. And we no longer live in that world anymore. What artificial intelligence and quantum computing has allowed us to do is to take millions of facts and now be able to very precisely predict a future event is going to occur. So when I say that, people go, I don't, what do you mean that the future is known? So the example that I usually give is that I can predict now with almost an 85–90% probability that you're going to trip and fall in the next 3 weeks. And they say, that's impossible. And I said, well, no, it's not, because now through artificial intelligence, we've now seen a pattern. And that pattern is that your normal walking gait changes 3 to 5 centimeters prior to falling, tripping and falling within a 3-week window. Now we have an algorithm. So imagine what that means for the elderly who frequently lose their ability to live independently as a result of breaking a hip or a leg, and suddenly they have to move into assisted living and have full-time care. We can actually, by putting a Fitbit-like device on their ankle, ping their phones, ping their caretakers' phones, ping their family's phones, that their walking gait has changed 3 to 5 centimeters, which is indiscernible by the human eye, and tell them to stay off of the stairs, uneven surfaces, get into physical therapy, repair the walking gait, and completely avoid a fall, a tripping and falling. Now that's amazing. And when you think about that, if I can determine that you've got an 85–90%, I can take an action, right, to avoid that negative outcome. And in many respects, we're moving toward a new era in human life where we can avoid many, many problems, from mass shootings, because we always work backwards, right? We see the mass shooting, and then we look at the perpetrator's behavior leading up, and we find all these data points, and we go, well, why didn't somebody say something? Why didn't somebody stop him? But most of that data that showed that mass shooter was moving toward criticality is actually in the public domain. You don't have to, I don't have to go search your medical records. They're posting their manifestos on social media, right? So the Las Vegas shooter, Stephen Paddock, for example, he was put on diazepam 6 months beforehand, and nobody who's got a family history of sociopath behavior should ever be on diazepam. And his father was a violent sociopath, once wanted by the FBI and imprisoned. And he moved Stephen Paddock moved 20 times. He sent his fiance away to a foreign country and sent her $50,000 and said, don't come back. He started buying more arms. He tried to buy tracer rounds, which are better at nighttime shooting. I mean, I went backwards in time to look at how many things were going wrong with Stephen Paddock, and I had over 100 data points that were indicating that this man was reaching criticality. And now we have red flag laws that say, all right, if we see that you're reaching criticality, if we see all these algorithms, right, and these data points being strung together, we can come and temporarily take your guns away and ask you to, undergo some kind of an analysis. And I know that this is not what people who are defenders of gun ownership want to see, but the alternative is to have the information and know that the person is in the 99.9 percentile of committing a violent act and doing nothing. So while we don't want to become Tom Cruise in Minority Report and have the thought police come arrest you because you fantasized something, we also don't want to ignore the fact that we have this wonderful opportunity to prevent many disasters. Opioid addiction is another one. Opioid addiction is rampant all over the world, not just the United States. The United States kind of leads in that addiction. Not a good thing to lead in. But there's a company called Fuzzy Logics that could administer a written questionnaire and look at your health records and determine within 85 or 90% that you're predisposed to become an opioid addict before the doctor gives you your first prescription. And 99% of addicts got hooked from a doctor's legal prescription. But what if the doctor had given you that questionnaire and used artificial intelligence to see if you're predisposed, genetically predisposed to get addicted, and then redirected you toward a different pain management course? So we're getting to a point now where these AI algorithms can do everything from inform judges. Judges are beginning to use them at arraignment hearings to determine whether the person should be released on their own recognizance, what the bail should be, whether they should not be released back into society. There are so many data points that can be put together, and these algorithms now can inform us from a factual and empirical standpoint, so that you won't wind up with a judge that says, okay, I know you raped that woman, but you come from a good family, so I'm just going to give you 3 months. You're not going to get variations like that anymore, because these predictive algorithms can inform us about what the likelihood of a future event is going to be, so that we can make better decisions today. And that's a whole sea change in how we make decisions anymore. We didn't really have the certainty of a future outcome, and now we do.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and I think about how AI has been heavily used in marketing, right? Figuring out what people's buying habits are, and so that you can sell them more stuff that they might want to buy, right?
And sure, people are most familiar with that, but that really isn't the real value.
And that exactly, that's what I was, that's not the real value. It may have driven it because it's, it's the commercialization of it, right? But this side of it is truly fascinating. Now, I know there are the people that don't want like you said, like in the Minority Report, you don't want that lack of privacy and that lack of freedom, feeling like, hey, but then when you look at the benefits of having this data and having it used wisely, and how we can pre-plan, we can predict these things, I mean, it would solve a lot of the problems. It's funny because people come and they, and they share their movements and so forth. And as I listen and I observe, I'm very analytical. And so as I'm observing this, I'm thinking, my goodness, a lot of what we're actually doing is treating symptoms as opposed to looking at cause. And if we could eliminate the problem entirely, then we wouldn't need to create a movement to fix it, if that makes sense.
That's exactly right. We're determining cause at a very rapid rate in very high percentiles. But there's a problem with knowing what the future is. There's a problem with knowing it's 99.9%, right? And that goes back to the Minority Report movie with Tom Cruise. Let's take Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter, as an example. Even after he sent his, fiance away, even after he'd bought all the guns, packed them, got into the room, even after he'd broken that window and pointed his gun down at the concert goers, he could have had a change of heart.
Yeah.
He could have said, you know what? I'm not going to do it. Put the gun down, packed it up, and gone home. And we believe in free will. But what we're determining now, and this is really a scary thing for a lot of people, is that free will isn't really all that free. In 99.999% of the cases, we can determine what you're going to do, because we are creatures of habit. And so the statistics now are going to say there's a 99.999999999% chance, but there's always that little chance that you could intervene, that you won't molest a child again, right?
Yeah.
that you will not that you will suddenly feel like you're not walking the same as you did before, and decide to get on your treadmill and self-correct, right, without us telling you. That you might be genetically predisposed to be addicted to opioids, but when you got the prescription, you knew that it felt so good to take that pill, you better start cutting them in half and monitor yourself. You can always override, right? There's always a chance to override, to make a different decision, to change course. This is where we're going to rub up against something we've never rubbed up against. When the facts indicate that there's an extraordinarily high probability you're going to do this, are we going to bet on free will? Or are we going to play the percentages? And I don't think that our judicial system, nor our capacity as individual human beings, are ready for this.
Right.
We don't really know how to handle a known future. And this is going to be a big challenge for governments and leadership.
Yeah, this comes back to something that you wrote about in your book, talking about human insight and the intuition. And you and I, when we talked previously, we talked about this example. But yes, are you going to bet on that small, minute percentage that somebody's maybe going to make a change of heart, or are you going to go with what is likely to happen? So it's going to be an interesting question, and hopefully you're going to stay in this conversation long enough to help us figure it out.
Well, I work
you
with
and other
organizations, you know, and when they say, well, we're struggling with this and this, and I go, well, all right, why don't we look at the fact that whatever you think you're struggling with, we actually know what the outcome is going to be. Let's nail down the outcome of what you're struggling with, and then reverse engineer the decision. When you know what the future is, you can reverse engineer the decision to either avoid a failure or a danger. So there's no reason for me to ever release a product that won't make it.
Right.
Right. So as a commercial enterprise, I can go out now and I can do quick focus groups and using social media. And as you point out, there's a lot of commercial applications. So there really should never be any such thing as the launch of a product that doesn't make it, because we've got tools that'll say how many you'll sell, at what price, right? And when your product needs refreshing or will, be dead in the water. I mean, we actually have models for all of that. Yeah. So there should be no such thing as a commercial failure based on that. Yeah. Where it gets tricky is where computers don't have any information. Innovation, for example. You come up with something that there is no track record. There's no data. There's no information. You'll go out and get a little bit. And so I think where it's going to help is where there's a lot of factual data available. And where it's not going to help is that it's not going to help where you're truly innovating and carving new ground. But most things are known. Most consequences are known. Now, the tricky part today is that the tools that are required to use predictive analytics in the way that I'm describing it are very expensive. And so who's got them? The government, Wall Street, large corporations. And to some extent, that digital divide is creating a social divide. Yes. Because those who know what's going to happen, there couldn't be a bigger advantage than knowing what the future is going to be, right?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how soon before this is actually accessible, and will it be accessible in the short term because of that specific strategic advantage?
Well, I like to think, I've been around a long time, and, technology always starts out as expensive. Only large corporations. Remember, IBM used to have all these hermetically sealed rooms inside corporations with people working with punch cards. And then all of a sudden now we've got cell phones that have more power than those entire hermetically sealed computing rooms. So yes, technologies an advantage is had by those who can get their hands on these tools, even though they're quite expensive and inaccessible to us on a day in and day out basis. But that always trickles down, and eventually AI tools will be available on your wristwatch.
Right.
It's just a matter of time. But that advantage is so large that it will have an impact. And it's having an impact on Wall Street right now. The common investor, you and I, we don't really have the tools to see where the market's going. And yet the huge investment funds, they have tools that we can't even conceive of that better their odds that they place better bets. So, I don't even like to go talk to my investment broker, because I realize I'm just, I'm a pawn waiting to happen. It doesn't matter what I do, it'll be wrong.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What sort of exciting projects are you working on as it relates to this? And if there is there new research that you're delving into now to take it to the next level?
I am. I'm taking a bit of a tangent. And that tangent is there's a lot of data, empirical data, and proven scientific research on what makes human beings happy. We have a lot of ideas of what will make us happy, and fundamentally we spend our whole life sort of chasing happiness. We have moments of happiness, and I'm not talking about being giddy every minute of the day, because that's not what I'm after, but true fulfillment and happiness. And it turns out that there are some very fundamental building blocks you have to have. And if I had known that, I would have gotten busy pursuing those, but I didn't know what they were. And we now have proof of what some of those things are. And people are pretty shocked when they learn, as they learn the things that have been proven. So, and not that much of your happiness is actually up to you. About 60%, 50 to 60% is genetically inherited. Your aptitude to be happy and enjoy life is actually largely inherited. And then a lot of it is cultural and your circumstance of where you were born. Probably only about a third is your decisions in life. We all run around like thinking 99% is our decisions and everything. But it does put an extra importance on about that third. Those decisions are really important because that's the only part you can really manipulate. And so shouldn't we know what decisions are more likely to make us happy or less likely? Like people think, okay, if I have children, I'll be happy. Well, actually, the empirical data says it won't make you happier.
Right.
There's no difference between people who have children, people who don't have children in self-reported happiness. And then there are a couple of things that will lower your baseline, your capabilities for being happy, from which you never rebound. And one of them is a prolonged period of involuntary unemployment. If you lose your job involuntarily for a long period of time, you never return to the former levels of happiness you experienced before that event occurs, which really puts a whole different social twist on unemployment figures. I don't think unemployment figures should be looked at as an economic barometer anymore. It actually is tied into people's ability to be optimistic and happy in life. And when you have massive unemployment, you are actually building a more depressed society. So these are the kinds of things that I think are very interesting, that when we find them out, and by the way, these studies on unemployment were done primarily in England by Nobel Prize economists. So I think if I could collect all of the actual studies that have been done on, if you do this, you up your probability of being happy, but if this happens to you, you're lowering it, and maybe you're only temporarily lowering it, and what you can do to bring it back up. I think if I could just, communicate the odds, how to better the odds, then it would really have an impact on children, on educating them, on helping them and guiding them, as well as our own pursuit of happiness. And there's a lot of empirical data, but I just think it hasn't been put all together in one book. So I'm combing through that research now. I only get a book out every 6 years, so it's not like I'm fast. I have to go through a lot of research to get one book out. So it's not like it's going to come out next month. Now give people time to get the Watchman's Rattle and On the Verge.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Well, and I do encourage, yes, our listeners to go to RebeccaCosta.com and you can get a copy of her book. I've mentioned this a couple of times, The Watchman's Rattle, which is the first one. The second one, On the Verge, is the one that speaks to this predictive analysis and kind of it's like this is a sequential evolution of research and data. And so each one is building on each other. So that's why I recommend that you get both copies of Rebecca's books, and just take your time through it. I had this interview coming up, so I went through it pretty quickly. And so I will even need to go back and read it again. There's just so much there in terms of understanding how we think and what does that mean for us in the world that we're creating and the world that's coming in the future. So I highly encourage you, go to RebeccaCosta.com. We'll make sure that is in the show notes, as well as all social handles, so you can reach out to Rebecca and connect with her and keep posted on her next book, which might be several years from now, but it'll be worth the read when it comes out. And so the thing is that leaders of transformation, I believe, take action. And we've got to take action on what we know. And like I was saying earlier, is that we can discover new things. It's kind of like we're going along this path, and we got to be on the path in order to continue to grow, to learn, and to make a greater impact in the world. So I encourage you to do that. Rebecca, thank you so very much for being here and spending some time. I could listen to you all day.
Well, thank you.
Fascinating.
We really had fun today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's just so much richness in what we shared. And then I just know that there's so much more that you have to share. And so that's why I just encourage everyone that they will go and read your information, read your articles, read your books. And
we'll have to do it again.
I will definitely.
This is a very, very nice conversation. And I always think it's fun when people feel like they can kind of eavesdrop into a conversation that two people are having that are respectful of each other's talents and gifts, and are really exploring, hey, let's turn this around from every angle and look at it. And I really enjoy how you do that.
Yes. Well, thank you. That means a lot. So.
And I see your kitty.
My kitty arrived. He was here earlier and then he left and then he's back. He likes to hang out too. He's like, tell me what you guys are up to. I want to be part of it.
Well, it's like I said, someone will study whether these conversations are making our pets smarter.
Well, if that's the case, he's had the opportunity to eavesdrop on a lot of really good conversations. So he's a pretty smart kitty.
He's a smart kitty then.
So, well, thank you again, Rebecca.
All right,
I really appreciate you. And thank you to our listeners again for being here. And we encourage you to go to leadersoftransformation.com. We'll have all the details to connect with Rebecca there as well. Of course, we've got over 300 previous episodes with Leaders of Transformation who are making a wonderful difference in the world. And so you can learn from them. Love to hear your stories. You can send me a comment through the website, or you can find us on social, and love to hear how this has impacted you, or questions, comments, also what you're doing to make a greater impact in the world. We'd love to hear it. And we'd also love to hear how we can support you in moving forward and in taking your movement and impacting millions through that. So we encourage you to reach out to us. Thanks again. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.